But, all right, so chapter 13 and 14 summary. We're going to talk a little bit about evolution, change. So now that we understand how cells work, yes, and we understand how DNA works, and we understand how protein synthesis works, and we understand a little bit about mistakes and changes, let's talk a little bit about changes in species with time. So a fellow by the name of Charles Darwin in the 1800s took a nice little trip on a ship called the Beagle. Basically because his parents wanted him to be a doctor and he really didn't want to do that. So he decided, oh, let me do this something else and maybe that'll distract him. So he noticed a couple of things about his environment. He noticed some differences in different species or similar species in the same areas. So he looked at the fact that birds, for example, on this little group of islands called the Galapagos Islands, were finches somewhat, but not all the same. So that we had a group of animals that had a lot of diversity in it. So he started to speculate about why. Why do we have all these different kinds of birds? We can group together in classes with shared characteristics some of the things we see in all of these different species. And that's what taxonomy is. Do you know what taxonomy is? It's a way, it's a way to classify different living organisms. When this was developed, it's a way to classify different organisms based on what? Yeah, very visual characteristics. Organisms seem uniquely suited for the environment that they are in. And he published a book called The Origin of Species. So his question was, okay, these guys are all birds. How come they're different birds? And noticed that these different birds were able to do different things depending on where they lived. So his travels took him, remember back in the 1800s, he just didn't jump on the American Airlines and go do his thing. So it took him many, many years to travel through all of these different places. And he gathered data the whole time. And again, living organisms, we all know they're made of cells. We all know that they're very similar. But why do we have so many different things? Why do we have so many different patterns? And where did they come from? So these are the questions that Darwin asked himself. And being a scientist by nature, of course, he had to create statements or hypotheses based on what he saw. So some of the hypotheses that he created and are discussed in his book, Origin of Species. Present-day species are descendants of ancient ancestors that they still resemble in some ways. And changes occur as a result of descent with modification, with natural selection as the mechanism. So in this grouping, we're trying to sort of define some of these terms that he has discussed in his hypotheses. What is descent with modification? And what is natural selection? And how does that play a role in the differences or the diversity that we see in organisms to date? Did I hit the record button? Yeah, I did. Okay, good. I'm losing it today. Okay. So natural selections. Do things change because of their environment? No. Things change because of what? Yeah, mistakes. Mistakes in copies, mutations.
But it's caused by the environment.
Some, and that's where the confusion comes in, some chemicals that we know of now can cause more mistakes to occur. But they don't They just cause mistakes. They don't cause specific mistakes.
The environment doesn't cause them to change. Because I watched Charles Darwin this weekend, and he said when he was on the island that the finches changed because of being on the island.
No, the finches change because of natural selection.
The ones that couldn't eat the food died, and the ones that could
Correct.
eat the food lived and reproduced.
And this is what we kind of have a hard time wrapping our heads around, because you obviously heard what you just said to me from that presentation, right?
Right, because some of the finches mated with woodpeckers, and there were woodpecker finches, and there were different kinds of finches, and some of them learned to eat with little sticks and didn't
So what would
eat.
the abilities they had based on their genetics allowed them to do what?
To learn to eat
Or to have the ability to do what they did in their what?
their environment.
In their environment.
'Cause
Now,
there's-
what if they genetically didn't have the ability to do that? They would have died because they wouldn't have been able to utilize the food source. Do you see what I mean? So the mistake didn't happen because of the environment, but the mistake turned out to be beneficial to the organism in that environment. Do you see what I mean?
That's natural selection.
That's natural selection.
But somebody could interpret it as the environment playing, like definitely, like having a major role in
Having a major role in whether what? That organism did what? Lived or died.
which is evolution.
Correct.
It's not evolution.
Well, in a way, it's
So
natural
if it
selection,
died, if it
exactly.
died, it would never been able to pass a gene on, which
Correct.
evolution would have never been able to happen.
Exactly, but it's the mutation that the environment either squelched or enhanced.
Or allowed.
It wasn't the environment that caused the mutation, it was the environment that either allowed the mutation to live or die.
Correct.
Which is having a major role.
It does its role.
It has a role,
But
but
the
didn't
point
cause
is
it.
the environment
No, but it has
caused
a major role on it.
It has a role because, again, the organism is either going to be able to survive or not survive. That's what natural selection is. So environments and chemicals can cause mistakes. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that one. We know that there's chemicals in our environment called mutagens, carcinogens. They cause mistakes. Yes? But natural selection is a process in which organisms with certain inherited characteristics, mistakes, and I hate to call them mistakes because sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. They're mutations. But it makes more sense to you when I say mistakes. Mistakes in the copy. I make a different protein. The result is different. They're more likely to survive. Wait a minute.
We studied that in Chapter 9 when it said replace this one nucleotide with, or put one in, and it changes the sequence for the rest of it. So
Correct.
That's all mutation.
Correct. Now, what might happen in that case? Organisms, it's bad for the organism, it might die. But what if it doesn't? And what if it creates an individual that now can utilize things in their environment their ancestors couldn't, like the finches and the sticks? What happened to their beaks?
Some are rounded, some are pointy.
Yeah, so now they could utilize what? A different food source that their ancestors couldn't, because their mistake, their mutation, was beneficial to them in that environment. Do you see where I'm going with this? So the environment didn't cause that mistake to happen or that mutation to happen, but it nurtured that mutation by allowing that organism to get strong and utilize a source that all of its brothers and sisters couldn't.
I think the best example is the bugs of white and black bugs
Yeah.
living on a white or black tree. That's the clearest example of evolution and natural selection.
Right?
Or those like gray moths in Britain that were like before the Industrial Revolution, they were like white and now they're gray.
Mhm.
So all the soot that
Because the ones, and moths have a lot of offspring, right? Some of them were gray. The ones that stuck out, easy pickings for birds. If I don't live long enough to pass that on, it ends. So whatever that change is, whatever that mutation is, it has to be beneficial to the organism, allowing it to live long enough so that it can then do what? And it doesn't even necessarily have to be beneficial to the organism. The organism just has to live long enough to pass it on. Because now we have diseases that we're passing on. They're not beneficial to us as a species, but we see more and more of them in the population. Diseases like what? Diabetes. Is that beneficial to us as an organism? No, but we see more and more of it in the population. See, what's the word I want? I'm talking evolution now. We see more and more of it in a population now because of what?
Modern medicine.
Modern medicine.
That's evolution, though, because a lot of that has to do with
But-
lifestyle.
Exactly, but think about genetics and the genes. The patient that has a genetic link to diabetes, type 1 diabetes. In the old days, those patients didn't live long enough to have offspring because,
There was no medicine.
exactly, but now with modern science, we see more and more of these genes.
Pass it on.
Exactly.
Should we not allow those people to live? Yeah.
Just
I
because
don't-
technology doesn't necessarily mean we should use technology.
Well, no, it's just that we
Good
have
for
to,
the human race, though.
no, but we have to realize that we're going to see more and more of those things in our
That's what
populations.
China said with the zero-sum population. We gotta think about the rate of human race. We can't be having families having 6 kids. One. I don't know. Especially after Battlefield going 65.
Okay, so as a result of natural selection, we get something called a population. And a population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same place at the same time. And we might see generations and change through those generations. And what would the change be due to? We might see change. Are we going to see it in our lifetime? Probably not. We have a very short. We're a dot on a timeline.
But humans have been on this planet for thousands of years.
Yep.
If there was a mutation going to happen to a human in those thousands of years, it would have happened already.
Do you think you don't think it's happened?
It has happened.
Oh.
All the species of humans that have been.
There's only one species of human. It's called human.
Right. But you think humans, when they first started walking on the earth, and humans today are exactly the same?
Yeah, we all have 10 fingers, 10 toes, 2 arms, 2 legs, and we walk upright.
No, we don't.
10 fingers and 10.
That's right. No, we don't. She's right. You all have blonde hair and blue eyes, and
No, but those,
No.
those are mutations, not evolution. You're talking about evolution changing.
Yeah,
Look,
but that's
my
because,
body, I'm not
again-
having any hair on it and having to put clothes on it to live through the winter. This
yes,
is
but
not-
you're only talking about a few thousand years. And this is the other thing we have to wrap our hands around.
Those things can change.
Well, we didn't need the fur anymore
Noticing
once we
that
started
leg
making
have
clothes.
changed in Japan, have changed.
Height
And
has
height.
changed. Cranium size has changed. Lots of changes. Lots and lots. Not a whole new species. No, 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 no.
We haven't changed.
How long did it take them to change?
Not very long.
How do you know?
Because Darwin noticed it.
Well, just because Darwin noticed it doesn't mean it happened in 2 days in front of Darwin's
No,
face.
but it took a lot less than thousands of years.
I think, I feel like
Says
I've heard
who?
somewhere that-
How would Darwin have
I
known?
feel like I've heard somewhere that island
they changed.
ecosystems have higher mutation rate and faster.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about reasons why. Because when you isolate a population, you isolate their genetic material. And what happens is those mistakes become much more evident in that small group. So natural selection leads to a group, a population. And that's individuals of the same species living in the same place at the same time. They change over generations evolutionary adaptations may take place, again, with those little finches. In one modern definition of evolution, the genetic composition of a population changes over time. So that same little group, as they have their offspring, aren't always going to be exactly the same. Remember, the changes have to take place where? In order to pass it on to our offspring. In the reproductive cells, exactly. So 2 points made in the origin of species. Organisms inhabiting the earth today descent from ancestral species. They came from their grandmother and grandfather. Well, that's a pretty obvious statement. Thank you very much, Mr. Darwin. And natural selection is a mechanism for descent with modification. So that was kind of the controversial comment that Darwin put forth, that our environment is going to determine whether or not we do what.
It doesn't work with humans, I'm sorry. It just doesn't work.
Well, why does it not work with humans?
Because we're smart enough to overcome whatever modification.
We manipulate our environment quite a bit so we can survive because we build houses and we have heat and all of that stuff.
Pheno traits are going to change.
Phenotypes.
They're going to change from one person to the next, and that'll happen in one generation to the next, blah, blah, blah. But we have been basically the same shape as we always, we have 2 eyes, and ears.
How long have we been on this earth?
I don't know. Nobody knows. No, they say they have 10,000-year-old skeletons, so.
How long? How old?
They say
Homo
they have,
sapiens, how long?
they say they have 10,000-year-old skeletons.
10,000 years.
10,000 years, and it's still got the same shape as the body I'm sitting in right now.
We've gotten progressively taller.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
But now, when we look at evolution, what do we use to look at these changes? How do we see these changes? Exactly. So, what do we have as information with respect to change? Fossil record, biographies. We can compare different species and look at some of the similarities, and that's what comparative anatomy does. We can compare embryos, developmental stages of different organisms, and that's what comparative embryology does. And then the best tool we have, and that's very, very recent a tool, is actually looking at genetic makeup. And that's what molecular biology is. So say this is the span of time where we have been on this planet, or this planet has been here. How wide a gap do we get on this?
oh,
Oh, that line right there.
no, it'd be way at the end there.
No, that line that you have that ends, that end point, that's 10,000 years.
Yeah. See this?
The line thickness you already got drawn on the
Yeah. No, we're right about there.
Where
We're not
you
even,
can't see
yeah,
it.
we're not even as thick. Yeah, you can't see it. That's the point.
Well, I can't see what you're pointing at.
This
That's
tiny, tiny little dip of a dot that I made. That's how long we've been on this planet. Yes? Okay, good.
But that still should 10,000 years on the evolution. If
How long did it take from the
evolution was
very
going to
first
change the human, remember now,
apes to become us?
Well, did apes
Took
become
2
us?
years.
yeah, no, they didn't.
There's the missing link.
But
It's always going to be missing.
Yeah, and that species, that's one of the things fossil records, remember, how do I make a fossil?
I don't know.
How do you know how you make a fossil? Right, something has to die, and then things have to cover it just right in order to make an impression of it left behind. Do you think we have a complete fossil record? Absolutely not.
Can't.
No. So there's a lot of missing links in our fossil record. There's a lot of missing that, how did that first Homo sapien come to be and where did it come from? So we have to look at what we've got for information, and then we have to compare similarities when we create that taxonomy. Is it exact? Absolutely not. And I think with the coming of molecular biology and the ability to look at the genetics of an organism, we can see a more clear picture of relationships between species. Correct.
relationships.
Well, are similarities relationships?
I don't know. But
I don't know.
Evolutionists are using those similarities to say definitively that we came from apes.
No, no evolutionist will ever tell you we came from apes, because they'd be wrong.
If you say we came from puddle of mud.
No, 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 no. We came from something, right?
Came from chemicals.
Do you agree with that? We came from something. We're a very highly evolved organism.
Elements.
So we came from something. So the first human just like popped out of a puddle?
That's what they're saying.
Yeah, no, that's not what they're saying.
Swimming around as a tadpole.
So that's, no, 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 no.
And next thing you know,
No.
we're a monkey.
Because you're thinking of it in the same, you're thinking of it in the same time span. That's what you have to realize. So no. So fossils are an imprint of remains of organisms that lived in the past, and we find it in sedimentary rock. So it's a very incomplete tool. Nowadays, what do we leave behind as humans?
Nothingness.
Trash.
Well, we leave a lot of trash behind, but now we can write things down. We have language. We have some way to file this stuff. But in the old days, we didn't do that. So fossil record is what we have for this end of our time on this planet. So, is the ordered sequence of fossils as they appear in rock layers. The oldest ones are going to be where? At the bottom. The younger ones are going to be at the top. So it reveals the appearance of organisms in some kind of sequence. We know as we go further down and we find fossils, those are older than the ones we find further up. Fits with the molecular and cellular evidence that prokaryotes are what was here first. They're the ancestors of what we call living organisms. Because as we go further down, what happens to our fossil records? We see less and less developed organisms, smaller and smaller, more prokaryotic. So this is an awesome piece of history here. And how was it unveiled? Yeah, see, this river ate through it and pulled down all of the rock beside it. So these guys down here are going to be what? The oldest, and these are going to be the newest with respect to time on this planet. Yes? And again, we have a very incomplete fossil record. No, you can see that they become less organized as we go down a layer like this. So the lower ones tend to be more simple organisms, and as we go and progress higher and higher in a group of rock like that,
How long did
we
you
see
think the Earth was made? How long ago?
billions.
You know,
I don't know the number off the top of my head. It's probably in your book. 3 points. Yeah.
27 is when we had.
I thought it was 4 point something.
billion?
Yeah. That's a lot of time. We are a speck with respect to evolution on this planet. Who knows what we are going to be in 100,000 years? 10,000 years is a speck.
So here's a good point to argue about right here, okay? Given
Okay.
The human race will cease to exist.
Yeah, oh, we're probably going to do it to ourselves, yeah.
So what you're saying is that when we come to the point in Earth where it's just trash, you don't think that a group of humans are gonna, our technology isn't gonna be advanced enough to be able to jump to a different planet?
I don't know. I can't answer that
If
question.
our technology gets to that point, you would think that the universe would be extinct.
And has somebody else done it before?
Yeah, this isn't the first Earth.
Well, this is the other, and this is where you're heading towards. That maybe the first human on this planet came from another planet that they trashed, and they had enough technology to get here and keep going.
No, they lost all their technology because they died before they could pass on and build the machine tools that we have today.
That's a theory, exactly.
So they lost all that technology and had to relearn everything.
Start from square one.
Flying through space, you know?
Pyramids were a mistake, didn't you see?
I don't know. I mean, that's a, no. Stop.
What did you say?
You didn't see the commercial?
The pyramids were a mistake.
Oh, yeah, that's a mistake.
I like that commercial. Guy's like, uh-oh. All right, so the people that's the science of studying the fossil record is done by a group of scientists called paleontologists, and they study the fossil record. Discovered many transitional forms that link past and present. So what these guys look at a lot of is similarities, links. And that's the group of scientists who have created that taxonomy as we know it today. So transitional fossils include evidence that birds, for example, descend from one branch of dinosaurs. Where are the dinosaurs, by the way? Yeah, they're all gone. Are they all gone?
Yep, alligators.
There are still some organisms that lived during that time that are still alive. And why are they still alive?
Dragonflies. They real.
Because they were able to do what? They were able to adapt to their what? Their environment. See? So did the environment make them what they are? No. The environment just was a part of them being able to survive or not survive. Correct. So transition fossils is what we call this. Whales descend from who?
Apparently, vitals.
Yeah, the theory with those guys is they came out of the water and then
Decided to go back in.
went back in.
This stinks out here. I gotta work too hard.
So what they look at in the fossil record is some of the similarities between organisms. For example, when I look at this limb on this ancient organism, it looks very similar, and you're going to study this in anatomy and physiology, to what? Yeah, that's my humerus, ulna, radius, and look at it. Okay? Phalanges.
Why would a whale have that?
So again, looking at the fossil record, they see, and going up in the layers, they see this mammal-type creature that seems to have developed limbs and land capabilities. And then all of a sudden, as we get a little bit further up, that same organism seems to go back and develop flippers and fins.
So could it be that they have it backwards? The whole life originated on
Who knows? No, they could. Well, I don't know about that. Because we think simple organisms.
Is that nobody has the
Exactly. And that to me, you know, when somebody sits there and tells me this is the answer, I look at them and say, yeah, prove it.
Yeah.
Because you don't have.
Global warming earlier. Prove it.
Well, that's easy to prove.
No.
Well, let's not have that. We'll have the discussion later on in the class.
This is hundreds of scientists.
So, the practice of what we call comparative anatomy looks at different organisms, different species, and compares body structures, sees similarities and differences, and how those might relate to the evolution of the species in general. So they attest to the evolution, a remodeling process in which ancestral structures became modified as they take on new function. So when I need to utilize an environment that's mostly water, those in my species that can swim through the water more easily are going to be able to utilize that environment much better than someone in my group or population that can't. Who's going to live longer to pass on their genes? The one that can swim around in that particular example.
Whales cannot stay underwater.
Yep, they still have to breathe the air, right? So we might be in between changes. Who knows? 100,000 years from now, maybe whales will not have to come up for air anymore.
I don't think they're with them on.
Who knows?
People will wipe them out first.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Yeah, we're kind of messing the whole planet up pretty quickly with respect to the evolution of the planet.
It's just a livelihood of
Yep. So, homology. What's homo mean? The same. Similarities in structures due to common ancestry and illustrated by the remodeling of the pattern of bones forming forelimbs of mammals for different functions. So we can see similar patterns, even though these are very different species. We see similarities in patterns between humans, arm, cat's paw, whale, fin, and
Looks like we're the closest to a bat.
bat wings. And all these animals are what? Mammals. All these are animals. Yes? So do you see where taxonomy comes from? So it looks at these similarities. As we start to see differences, that's when we see the break off of different branches in the taxonomic tree.
One mammal must have came from one common ancestor.
Maybe. Can it pop up in two different places? Has that been seen?
Mutations. It's all about mutations.
Yeah. It's all about mutations, is right. And then if those mutations are passed on and if that organism lives to be exactly. You know, chances, statistics are very slim, but could it happen? I say yes. Or the same mutation might happen in the same type of environment 4,000 miles away from each other. Can that happen? Yeah. Again, the statistics are very low, but can it happen? Yeah. So when we look at comparative anatomy, we look at something called vestigial structures. And those are remnants, things that are left behind of features that may have been more beneficial to our ancestors than they are to us today. Let's put it this way. What's your appendix doing for you? Well, actually we've discovered it's not really nothing, but it's not a hugely important organ. It's part of your lymphatic system, and it's lymphatic tissue. But it hangs off the large intestine in a very ridiculous way, and most of the time it's just a bothersome thing for us. Yeah. But some people who have studied comparative anatomy and looked at evolution of the species have theorized or hypothesized that that particular group of tissue at some point helped us digest cellulose. But because of the way our diets changed through the 10,000 years that we've been around, we don't really utilize it as much.
It's good we don't have to learn how to hunt weapons instead of forage.
How about wisdom teeth? What are those doing for you? Besides being a pain in the keister, having to be removed.
Those are fun.
Do you know that there are children being born today that don't have them? Could that be an example of evolution? Yeah.
Why do we have?
But do they still have, what is it, what do we have, 32 top bottom? Do they still have 32 teeth top bottom? They might
No.
not have their wisdom teeth, but do they still have 32 teeth?
30. Yeah. 30 or 28,
Teeth ripped out.
right? How come we don't have sharp canines anymore?
I'm pretty sharp.
Yeah, really sharp.
Some people have sharper than others, right?
My daughter used to look like a vampire. I have pictures of her. She was like,
Could those be examples of evolution, of change? What are they going to look like in 100,000 years? 100,000, not 10,000, 100,000. Who knows? So, when we look at developmental stages, embryology, this is another science that is very, very interesting. We see a lot of similarities between species we are thought to have evolved from. So early stages of development in different animal species reveal very similar embryology, homologies, relationships. For example, our mammals grow in what? Yeah, and what's inside the sac? Water. So we develop our developmental, our embryology, embryo, fetus, year, 40 weeks, is what? In water. Can we survive in water? Can we breathe in water? How come our embryos can? Ah. So see the similarities between some other organisms? Example, we have something called pharyngeal pouches that appear on the side of an embryo's throat that look like what? If I look at the embryo of beginning fish or chicken, we all look the same. We have gills. They develop gill structures, form parts of the ear and throat in humans. So we have similar structures embryonically. As we grow larger, we see them change. But comparative embryology of vertebrates supports the theory of evolution. Okay, is it just a coincidence? Who knows? Nobody knows. So that's a chicken? That's a human. Same parts. Yeah? Really hard to tell the difference. Yes? When this organism starts to develop further, then we start to see differences. But this is what comparative embryology looks at. Comparing embryos of different species.
I don't know why they do that, though, because if you're thinking about chromosomes and cellular, the reproduction and all that, it has to look the same at one point or another.
Why?
Because the cellular structure hasn't progressed past it yet. So the chickens...
The cellular structure has, you're on the right track. What hasn't progressed? Cells, one cell makes two cells, makes three, but then we create what? Different what?
Genes.
Tissues.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. So if you're going to have a eukaryote and it's going to be an animal, it has to start with one cell. So
Which then differentiates into different tissues.
Right. So to say that we're all the same because we at an embryonic stage we look the same. I mean, give me an example of that guy's chromosomes. And
Where did the,
chromosomes
what came
on top
first?
look the same.
Yeah, but what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Proto-chicken.
Do you see the argument here? So we can argue, I can argue both sides. I'm good at both sides, but devil's advocate, yeah, I'm good at that.
No, you're not the advocate.
So the science of molecular biology has given us so much more information about where we came from, similarities, and at the cellular level, and that's the key, our cells, and the code in which our cells possess. So DNA and the proteins that DNA code for is something that's going to change, absolutely change, I can positively tell you change, our taxonomic outlook, what we thought was related to what, when we start looking at its molecular biology. So evolutionary relationships among species can be determined by comparing those genetics and then the proteins and how those proteins react in the organism. So proteins or different organisms can be looked at. Now if you look at genetics and the percentage of select DNA sequences that match that of a chimpanzee, who's closer to us?
Like the gorilla.
No. We are closer to,
You said who's closer to us?
yeah. Well, we don't, this guy below us, I'm talking about the guy above us. Yes? So we are closer genetically to a chimpanzee than we are genetically to a gorilla. If we go down, we have least similarities. Down to up, more similarities. Yes? This guy has similarities to us, but we have more similarities to chimp. How about this guy? He's far away. Yes? This guy, even further away. This guy, even further away. So we don't come from, we have to think of that link species. Where was that link? Where was that missing link? Exactly. Correct. So again, when we talk about evolution and why it happens or how it happens, we always have to think of populations, groups of similar species. And now, can species mate with each other? Yeah, sometimes they can. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. So a group of individuals of the same species living in the same place at the same time is a population. And that smallest biological unit that can evolve is also a definition we use to define a population. Change, reproduce, make more. A collection of different alleles or groups of information. Now we're talking DNA, right? Everybody understands what an allele is? What's an allele? It's a group of and now I just took my timeline and made it into DNA. It's a group of information on chromosomes that codes for a specific protein, which results in a specific trait. Yes? So a total collection of alleles in a population at any one time is a gene pool. So give me some examples of alleles in your gene pool. Who? Eye color. Hair color. Whether you have hair or not. Yes? Height, weight, size of your feet, size of your hands. Yes? Color of your skin. Those are alleles in your gene pool. So the frequency of alleles changes over a number of generations. Evolution is occurring on the smallest scale. So, say I have a population of people that get stuck on a deserted island. And on that deserted island, I have 5 people with brown eyes, and I have 1 person with blue eyes. What might happen to blue eyes in that population over time? How come? So did nature cause that to happen? It could go. Yeah, what if they were all heterozygous brown-eyed, right? And the only person to mate with on the whole island was the blue-eyed person, right? So I'm glad you brought that up. So that's how we see populations change. When they become isolated, that's what happened to our little finches. They became isolated. So certain characteristics and certain traits tended to be amplified in small populations. I'm going to talk about a couple of different ways to do that. So when we look at a gene pool, that consists of all the alleles in a population and is a reservoir from which the next generation draws its alleles. So that pool, just kind of like a dice, if I were to throw it, the only results I'm going to get from my offspring, or the results I get from the dice that I throw, comes from the pool, the numbers on the dice, or comes from the pool, alleles in your gene pool. So it's nice to mix up your alleles, yes? So there's mathematical statistical formulas that you can use to calculate your outcomes, and that's what Mr. Hardy and Weinberg discussed when they discussed the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium theory. So, how can we tell if a population is evolving? A non-evolving population is in what we call genetic equilibrium, also known as a Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And that means the population's gene pool is consistent over time.
Generation change.
There's no change. Does that happen?
From a genetic perspective, evolution can be defined as a genetic generation to generation change, not generation 10,000 years ago to a generation today. Generation to generation.
Yeah.
But is it going to be a huge change in one generation? Yeah, no. So change in population's frequency and alleles, sometimes called microevolution. Micro, little changes. Teeny. So microevolution and macroevolution is what we're going to talk about from chapter 13 and chapter 14. The other thing we're going to discuss is genetic drift, changes in the gene pool. Now this can happen because of different groups of individuals being isolated in a population. They give us an example of something called the bottleneck effect, which we're going to show you in a minute. And then the genetic flow, same thing.
Where did they get the words from?
Well, when we find or create a new population due to a bottleneck, that's the founder effect. I'll show you in a minute. So gene flow, loss of genetic alleles when fertile individuals move into or out of the population. So we can gain alleles, we can lose alleles, or I should say variations in alleles in different populations at different times. So we're going to define these. Some of the main causes of evolutionary change are things called genetic drift or genetic flow, and of course natural selection. Natural selection is the most important because it is the only process that promotes what? Adaptation. Again, whatever it is that caused the change has to be what? Helpful to the organism, or not harmful to the organism, so it can live long enough to do what? Pass it on to their offspring. So genetic drift's a change in the gene pool of a small population due to a change in the population. So say I have, 20 different ducks, for example, and they have a certain gene pool. And then some guy comes along and decides those ducks are really cute and I want to have those ducks on my property just for me. So he captures 5 of the ducks from that population. Do you see where I'm going with this?
The gene pool just got less.
Yeah, exactly. So now your gene pool changed. Now I just have the genes that those 5 ducks that he captured has. And those 5 ducks are then going to do what? Pass those genes on to their children and create a population that's much more similar to just the 5 ducks than the original 20 ducks. Well, that's a mutation. And what happens in nature, typically what happens to albino animals? Do they live long enough? No, because they're easy pickings. But again, we as humans, we might capture that deer or that moose and bring them to a zoo, and then what do? We breed them so they can then do what? Make more. You see where I'm going?
Release into the wild.
So the bottleneck effect is an example of genetic drift. Again, change in the genetic pool, and results from drastic reduction of a population. So say we have some sort of catastrophic event where a group of, let's go back to my 20 ducks again. Say we had some sort of avalanche and we wiped out.
Why are there ducks in an area where there's an avalanche?
No, I'm just using that as an example. I'm using ducks because every time I leave my driveway lately, I live right across the street from a lake, and every time I look out, all I can see is little duck butts up in the air because they're all excited about the lake went down, so they're woohoo, food. So that's why ducks come to mind. But anyway, passing through a bottleneck, a severe reduction in population size for whatever reason, a duck avalanche, or a disease that might kill off a lot of organisms in a population. That could be another reason for the bottleneck. Or something came and destroyed a whole bunch in that species. Yeah, we have created some serious bottlenecks. Exactly. Decreases the overall genetic variability in that population because at least some alleles might be lost from the pool. You know, the chances that we pass all the variations on in that small group are slim. Results in a loss of individual variation, and then if the species is hardy enough to live, adaptation. So they give us an example, and this is outlined for us on page 261 in the textbook. They talk about passing through the bottleneck and the cheetahs. So cheetahs appear to have experienced at least 2 genetic bottlenecks, usually for environmental reasons. Yeah, no, go. You have your parent-teacher conference. So during Ice Age, so what happened during the Ice Age for these guys? What happened? Yeah, a big group of them were wiped out because they couldn't survive the elements.
Is that, the cheetahs have the big canine?
Back, yeah. Saber-toothed tiger is where we think they came from. During the 1800s, when farmers did what? Killed them all. Okay, so we, in our short span of time, have created all sorts of, or wreaked all sorts of havoc with the taxonomic tree. How many different? Buffalo, turkeys, eagles. The list goes on and on. Okay. So with little variability, the cheetahs today have reduced capabilities to adapt to their environmental changes. Because what happened to the variability in their gene pool? It got less and less and less because of the bottleneck. So their variability is less and less and less. So they have less ability to do what? Adapt to changes in their environment. Yes?
But not necessarily if you think that all the cells have the inherent ability to mutate whenever they feel like they want.
No, but what, again, it doesn't matter what that one individual can do.
It can reproduce, but there's no reason why.
It has to go into what? And this is what we have to remember. I can mutate as an organism, but where does the difference have to be passed? Right. So I can change as an organism. I do it all the time. But that makes no difference.
What I'm saying is the bottleneck didn't stay a bottleneck. Once we realized we were killing them off and they started the population growing.
Yeah, but we still, now we have to do what? Yeah, but now we only have this to work with instead of this.
But they mutated. And as they grew, they kept mutating. So now we have this again.
No, we just have more organisms with this.
No, the organism mutated.
No.
This wasn't this anymore. Now it's.
No, we still only have this. We just have more of them. Yes? Think gene pool, think alleles, think variables in alleles.
They're called mutations, and they happen all the time.
They happen all the time, but how many years is it going to take?
Mutation expand the gene pool?
That's what I'm saying.
A mutation would expand the gene pool, but how many? Yes, but it doesn't mean that they're going to happen all the time either. You're under the impression that they're constantly happening in reproductive cells, and that's not the case. In organisms, yes. But where?
When you bottleneck the cheetahs, okay, now we only have this.
Correct.
But it's been a bunch of years, and now we have a lot of cheetahs out there, and their genes mutated, and those reproduced.
Well, who said they all mutated? You think that just happens all the time?
Yeah.
What are the different? So biology tells us that the cheetahs. You say the cheetahs mutated a lot. So what are the new beneficial characteristics that the new found cheetahs have that the old cheetahs didn't?
I don't know, I haven't studied.
Exactly.
I'm sure that there's some.
Okay. There might be one or two, yeah. So the other, wait a minute, 2 to 3:30. The founder's effect is likely when a few individuals colonize an isolated habitat. So again, bottlenecking, founder's effect, lowering that gene pool. Represents genetic drift in a new colony. So say we had 2 different groups of cheetahs, back to the cheetahs again. And this one over here had a very wide and varied gene pool. And this one over here had a very slim and narrow gene pool. If these guys somehow find their way into this small group, it opens up the gene pool, and that's what the founder's effect is. So the founder's effect explains the relatively high frequency of certain inherited disorders in some small human populations. So we see isolated populations of people taking these disorders and passing them down to their offspring in an isolated group or population. So gene flow is extremely important. Gene flow is extremely important for the health of an organism. Is another source of change, evolutionary change. When we isolate populations and we don't mix up the gene pool, the chances of that population being hardy and surviving become slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. So gene flow is going to help mix up the genetic pool. It separates from genetic drift. Is genetic exchange with other populations, is that healthy for a group to have other populations coming in and contributing their genetic material to that group? Absolutely. May result in the gain or loss of alleles and tends to reduce genetic drift differences between populations. So we're going to pick up with natural selection, a closer look on, what's today? Today's Wednesday. Monday.
We don't have class next Wednesday, do we?
Nope.
Yeah, I just found this out. I thought we had classes on Wednesday.
Nope. So this next week is Thanksgiving week, correct? So we only have school Monday and Tuesday.
Oh.
Yes, Tuesday. So I'm saying this on the recording. There are classes Monday and Tuesday. Not me. You don't have to come and see me on Tuesday, but there are Tuesday classes. Your take-home test is due on Monday, November 25th. So Monday, November 25th. And yours is done. Very good. Where's the calendar? Yep, Monday, November 25th.